everyone. Welcome to week 7. And today we have another interesting and hopefully engaging topic for everyone, including myself. So that's why, I was playing some music in the background before I started the recording. So now I'm hoping that you all have some memory of endocrine system, what are its components, and I encourage you all to watch this video to understand impact of stress among on human brain. And then I'll also be citing what this TED talk mentions about. So I'll discuss one of its finding, but it will be very interesting if you can have a listen to this talk in your post-lecture activities. So today our aim is first we'll revise what happened in HPA, what are the components, then we'll go through what is its role when humans are dealing with any kind of physiological or psychological stress. Is it normal? Is it not normal? So we'll try to find some answers. Then we will delve deeper into how stress impacts certain diseases, certain nutrients, their absorption. And the aim is that I kind of start diverting you towards some research findings. So that's why, those slides regarding the nutrients that can address stress response, it is not mere listing of certain nutrients, but I have tried to, in very short, written the clinical findings of few laboratory studies. And the last bit is one of my favorite. And what happened is that I've noticed that some of my own friends and practitioners, they don't consider lifestyle modifications in high regard. Okay, so that's why we will discuss whether some of these ancient lifestyle, if I may use the word therapies, can modulate stress response. Do we know for sure? Okay, so that's our short plan for today. So as you would recall, hypothalamus, it's a tiny neuroendocrine structure present in our brain. And it comprises of various nervous fibers. And through its neural connection, it helps us in doing various homeostatic mechanisms in our body. So it takes care of thermoregulation. It dominates how and when we are eating and drinking. And apart from that, it also takes care of our memory. Then you would recall that it also produces various releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones, such as ADH, CRH, or GRH. So these are various hormones that are being released, and then hypothalamus, kind of these hormones are acted upon on the pituitary, both anterior and posterior pituitary, leading to a cascade of hormones to regulate various body responses. And today our main focus would be on hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, because this is known to play an important role in regulation of our stress response. And okay, so let's go through this little diagram. So remember, always our body is trying to stay in harmony or trying to maintain homeostasis. So if there is any stressor in the body, it is trying to cut it out or resolve it through various mechanisms. Now, a vast amount of research has been conducted to understand the intricate cascade of events that occur once brain detects a disruption in homeostasis or stressor. And the hormonal responses is driven by this HPA axis. Would anybody like to recollect or comment what's happening in this HPA axis? You can use this diagram to explain your understanding. Too early on a Monday? So whenever there is a stress, fever, surgery, change in blood pressure, hypoglycemia, it can be a physiological or a psychological stress as well. So maybe let's say we are at the height of a mountain and we are stressed by the height. So all these kinds of stressors, they initiate a response from hypothalamus that secretes corticotropin releasing hormone. This goes on and instructs the pituitary to start producing ACTH. And ACTH then stimulates adrenal cortex for releasing cortisol. So that's kind of, yes. And Isabel has kind of said the same thing in the chat box, that it involves hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. Now, normally, under normal circumstances, when there is too much cortisol and the stress response has waded away or the body has addressed it, then high amount of cortisol should actually inhibit its own release. So it should tell the body, okay, enough of me in the system. I have done what I was supposed to do. Now you can stop this cycle. So this is what happens in the normal process. And do you think that it is related to our circadian rhythm? Has anybody read about the importance of light or circadian rhythm and how it goes together with the release of cortisol? Yes, thank you, Courtney. So we now know that there is a peak of cortisol in the morning. And that's the normal thing. Melatonin has to go down and cortisol has been released. So we wake up, we do our normal activity. Thanks, James. Yes, you're right. And Isabel is also saying that people who have jet lag issue, that is also related to circadian rhythm. Yes, that's correct. And people who work in shifts, night shifts, there is an issue there also. Their HPXs get confused because they are forcing themselves to that flight and fight response, because they have to go through that shift. And now, a lot of data is coming up on night workers who worked in hospitals, who work in all these call centers, and they are looking at their cortisol and HPA axis response to understand what is the impact of this stress on body's other health parameters and disease condition. Now, also remember that this impact of cortisol has to be really short term, because what does cortisol do? why it should be really short term, and what is cortisol supposed to do in our body. Would anybody like to comment? Yes, Tracy and Isabel, you both are right that it instigates that fight or fly response. And when we wake up, yes, Jane, it's going to increase sympathetic system. So it increases gluconeogenesis. It reduces insulin sensitivity. It increases fat and protein mobilization. So as humans, we are getting ready to do something, to fight something. So body kind of targets all it reserves so that we can pass through this phase quite quickly. Do you think it has a down, it has some negative connotation? Like, as if now what I'm saying, it's sounding really positive, isn't it? There is a fight and fly response. I have to go through it. I have a presentation tomorrow. I am nervous. So my cortisol is high. But does it has any negative connotation or positive connotation? Or implication should be the right word. Very good, Isabel. Yes. So too much of it, not good for the body. And Jane is saying, yes, it can make you feel tired and unwell. Very good. Thank you, Tracy. Chronic response can cause adrenal fatigue. That's what Tracy is saying. Awesome. Yes. So that's what we are now going to kind of go deeper. What is happening at our cellular level? How is such a good hormone, which is helping us to address some of the unpleasant factors in our life, can be actually harmful to the body. So, okay, so that's what we have already discussed. So now let's move on about this stress or stress response. Now, this concept of stress is not new, okay? So, most recent citing that we can find is in 1914, when a physiologist named Walter Cannon, he said that stress is a challenge to the steady state of organism. Then in 1939, this concept was really popularized by Hans Selye because he talked about the biomedical relevance of stress. So please remember that this is actually a body's response. Even an anticipation can prepare the body to target any stressor. Why? Because body wants to stay calm, zen-like, isn't it? Body wants to stay in a homeostasis. Every cell, every nutrient. But it's not easy because we have stressors in our environment and inside us all the time. Would anybody like to share some of the stressors in our environment, except for nutritional biochemistry and its assessment? Give me some more examples. Okay, so I have some answers in the chat box. So Courtney is saying work-life balance. Yes, when we are working, we are taking care of the family, then we are addressing some of our own health issues or personal ambitions. Yes, work-life balance can be an issue. And I absolutely agree with Isabel. Traffic, difficult neighbors, some people, because everybody is in their own zone and they have their own reality in which we are all living in a different bubble. And Jane is mentioning bills, working overtime. Overtime. I get that, Jane. Yes. Yes. And Courtney has added another one, relationships in all forms. Yes, whether that's with our partners, with our children, with our parents, with our work colleagues. Oh, Jane, I like that one. Jane is saying highly processed foods are a stress. Oh, yes, but yes, yes. You know how much, yes, but it's a good stress, isn't it? Because Jane is saying how much time it takes to prepare, to then go shopping, find out places where we would find organic foods and veggies, and I totally agree. It is a stress. Okay, so in my notes, I have got some Australian data. Um, and this was done by, I'm just sharing it, that this was done by Australian Psychological Association, Stress Well-Being in Australia survey. It was done in 2015. And they surveyed about 1,500 adult males and females. And what they found were that 35% of Australian reported significant level of distress, negative emotional states, mental fatigue, irritability, symptoms of anxiety and depression. And the top cause of stress was similar to what you all have kind of uh, posted or in the chat box: money matters, health issues, family issues, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Okay, can you guess what were the common stress management strategies that Australians would have reported in that survey? Any guesses? I'm just. Yes, Jane. Jane is saying alcohol. 40% of people reported that they drank alcohol to manage their stress. And food. Yes, 72% reported that they went after something to eat. Yes. Couple of more. 85% of people said they watch television. Oh dear. Oh dear. Yeah, yeah. So, see, we all have different coping strategies. So, people use most of what they get. But the good thing I'm noticing here from that report finding is that 81% of people spend time with their family. And I'll touch upon that in detail in coming up slide, why it is a very good stress management technique. And Isabel is commenting, some people may overwork. Yes, they may, but that did not stand out in that survey. But I agree with you. Some people may just spend some time uh, focusing only on work, work, and work. Now, Tracy has mentioned something in the chat box, which I would really like you people to discuss. She's saying, what about intense exercise? Can it elevate cortisol negatively? What do you say, guys? I agree, Jane. Yes. Yes, Isabel, that's very good. This kind of understanding, I'm really happy because excess of anything is bad and too much exercise when a body is not prepared, it doesn't help. And I can kind of personally relate it because I've been trying to lose weight all my life. And lately, post 45, I'm feeling a lot of central obesity. And you think of it, the amount of cortisol which is there in my system all the time. Initially, because I was doing a PhD, and then all the changes that keep happening in our academic world. Even if I go for exercise and I'll do uh, even weightlifting and all that, unless I take care of my stress management, I address my cortisol, I can't see a weight loss. Okay? So, yes, exercise leads to enhanced cortisol. Okay? So, I hope we answered Tracy's question. And now, another point that we are making here is that even mere anticipation, because we are kind of such evolved human beings, and throughout these process of millions of years, we have faced different kind of physical and psychological stressors. Our body responds even if we are anticipating any kind of stress. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, now this diagram is very, very important. And I'm thinking what some of you have been discussing just now in the chat box, it will kind of make it more clearer. So before I dig onto this diagram, can I ask another question? Would you agree that you need an optimal amount of stress to perform at your best in any stressful situation? Little bit of, oh yes. Okay, I'm feeling really good that you people have that pre-understanding. And I agree, Jane, Isabel, Courtney, yes. And it has a scientific name also. Uh, you don't have to remember it, but I read it, so I'll share it with you. It's called as Yerkes Dodson law in psychology. Okay? So it comes from there. So there is kind of multidisciplinary approach when we are talking about holistic. So we are looking at every aspect. So yes, Tracy, that little bit of stress, that little bit of oomph and pump that our body gets to tackle an assignment, to go overseas and acclimatize to a different physical and psychological environment. So we need that stress. Now come back to this diagram. So that little bit of positive stress that we are talking here is called as eustress. Okay? Eustress. Please remember this diagram from the exam perspective as well. So this is what we call as functional stress. Body is trying to carry out certain tasks and it may or may not be in a familiar situation. But whatever we were talking about in the previous slide, that's distress. So it is kind of a parabola where the peak, which is again the term that I'm using is short term. So this is good. However, if there is no cortisol at all, that also can lead to distress, which is one side of the parabola, and the other side is when there is too much exposure, too much stress level, too much cortisol, that can also lead to distress. So whatever we are discussing in this session, we are actually saying it is distress. That's the difference. Okay. So kind of definition of stress, it includes an internal factor, an external factor, and correlation between these two. Now I'm going to ask another question. Do you think different people have different level of this distress or coping mechanisms? Thanks, Courtney. Yes. Some people may be stressed before their first kiss or before their first job interview. Even that, these are some stress. However, other people, they will laugh it out. They will be okay. Yes, Isabel, I agree. And Courtney is also sharing how, she and her sister, they cope stress well. Yes, so we all are different, and actually the latest understanding is that we can actually prepare our body well to manage a stressor. And wonderfully framed Isabel, that mental attitude makes all the difference. And that's what that TED Talk talks about, which is the link is given in your post-lecture activity, that if we start perceiving any stress as something positive, because it is helping me to go through a phase in my life, then our body respond in a different manner altogether. So that's why an emphasis on stress managing techniques, or rather distress managing technique. I really hope in future we start saying that it is distress and it is not the normal eustress, which is in a way good for the body. So that's why we have different kind of stress. We have an acute stress, that is flight or fight, which you are all aware about. Then we have something called as chronic stress, which remains in our body for a long, long time. Continuous exposure to a particular stressor, bills, money matters all the time, and we are not able to cope with it. That actually in long term start impacting our immune system. Okay. So just trying to emphasize, bear in mind that not all stress is always negative. And that TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal actually says that when we are stressed, we produce oxytocin. Would anybody recall what does oxytocin do? Oxytocin. So that hormone, where is it released? When is it released? Yes, Yes, Jane, we have always known it for initiating lactation. Yes, Isabel, reproductive system. What is that hormone doing if it is released in a stress response? So oxytocin is released as part of our body's stress managing response. So remember when I said that cortisol has to go down in the normal stress response. At that time, our body releases oxytocin as a anti-stress uh, effect. It reduces blood pressure and it reduces cortisol. And you know, oxytocin, as Isabel has rightly pointed out, associated with love, with family, children. So at that time of stress, we reach out to our near and dear ones. Because when we share, when we vent it out, you know, whatever is burning in our mind, whatever hardship we are facing, we feel kind of de-stress. So remember that kind of as a management technique for your clients. So trying to figure it out, and if they don't have a support system, which I sometimes notice they don't have, people are lonely. So kind of encourage that kind of support for them because it will do wonder with their metabolic health. Okay, Tracy has another good point today, like endorphins from exercise stress. Yes, Tracy, I think something like that. Yes, yes. And oxytocin would itself also lead to release of certain endorphins. So definitely. Okay, so few interesting things, and you know, because we have clients coming with these kinds of stress, so it's important that we are prepared with some stress management strategies, and 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 again trying to understand the nutritional biochemistry behind it, how it is happening. So you now know what this diagram is telling us. So whenever there is a let's start with a little bit of stress. Hypothalamus perceive it and it initiates a sympathetic response. Along with that, it initiates a HPA response. And the next slide then goes on to kind of delineate all of those steps. Okay, so it's kind of whatever we have been discussing so far. It just provides an example of how physiologically during an acute stress response, body tries to fight it out. So basically all hands are on deck to facilitate survival from any saber-toothed tiger like external factor. So even immune system is put on hold because cortisol directly hampers, inhibits, controls immune responses. But again, it has to slow down after the stress has been addressed. So now what happened? This was an acute stress response, which was a protective mechanism. However, when that stress response cannot be inhibited, cortisol somehow does not get the message that your work is done. It is not. So that negative feedback loop is not functioning. It is something like that there is a permanent red light. There is no green light coming up and you are stuck there. So that's what's happened. Cortisol remains elevated and it continues to do what it's supposed to do. And that is now an issue to address because chronic stress is now correlated with different chronic conditions, disease conditions. Okay. And we touched about what's written in this slide a little bit earlier, that different people have different perception of stress, and that can actually help in developing coping strategies. So we can't give a same pill to everybody. So first step is that when a client comes to me and I take their occupational history, their family history, I understand that they have some stress in their life and there are diverse coping strategy as per their genetic predisposition, early life stress, and social support. Okay. I think there is one video, I'll post it on Loop. This was a mice study and it was actually done. These were the pups of these mice. They were exposed to a stress response in vitro. And then they looked at, after many generations, they could see the influence of that stress in the progeny, even after generations. Okay. So very important that we tune our mind to address that stress in a different landscape altogether, because chronic stress can impair adaptation and contribute to cognitive dysfunction, depression, cardiovascular diseases, obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. So while, there might not be you must be thinking that there might not be a direct correlation between chronic stress and diabetes. But see, remember what happening in chronic stress, cortisol is acting on the inflammatory molecules. Cytokines are being released because body is in a fight mode. And all those cytokines, inflammatory molecules, when they stay in the body for a long time, they start harming the body. And that translates in most of these disease conditions. So Isabel is asking, is it possible that mother transmit their chronic stress to their newborn children? Yes, Isabel, there is a lot of evidence, and that's what we know of today as, again, I'm going to use a scientific term. I'm just typing it, guys, and then I'll say it. It is called as early metabolic origins of diseases. There is a whole new word of research going on. And yeah, Courtney, you're right. Generational trauma is something, yes, we have become more aware of. Yes, and we can correlate it in our history, whatever. As a human race, we have faced many years ago, or maybe in our family, if we have faced something. Yes, we can all relate to it. And yeah, Would anybody else like to comment on that? Again, you people are really fast and going ahead with the slides today, and I'm happy about it. So I'm going to say something which I was going to discuss earlier, later in the slide. Has anybody heard of Barker's hypothesis? Sorry, spelling of hypothesis are incorrect. Apologies in advance. Has anybody heard about? So Barker is actually a professor in UK. He did a lot of work looking at the survivors of Irish famine. Remember that? I know it was long time back. Has anybody heard about that? Something to do with potatoes? Yes, thanks, Jane. So he actually looked at those people, and there's a whole group of UK researchers who found out that those people who were even in their childhood who were exposed to certain stress situation, they were susceptible to these kind of condition later in their life: diabetes, CVD, and digestive disorders. And they also found out that if children who are born low birth weight, less than 2.5 kilos, I think that's the borderline, they are also more susceptible to metabolic conditions later in life. So we are still trying to understand where and how it is happening, and that will kind of link up to what we will study next week. Sorry, again, my spelling mistake. I should go slow. Epigenetic mechanism. So that's what work by Barker and his colleagues have made us understand, that epigenetic environmental changes, they stay and they can influence switching on and off of a particular gene expression in our body. So an environmental hazard ages ago in a different generation, they are saved somewhere, and they may express if we expose ourselves to a different environment or a situation. So they develop later in life. Okay. So how does this chronic stress impact our human body? Please remember some of these factors for the exam question. So you may be asked as a short answer question, explain the impact of stress on a human body. So I know you all already know so much. So very good, I'm happy about it. But try to remember some of these technical terms as well, that chronic stress impairs our immune system. There is a data that our body has something called as natural killer cells. Okay, so they are supposed to fight out the virus and bacteria. However, when we are exposed to a lot of chronic stress, lot of cortisol in the system, it leads to 50% reduction in their number. Plus, higher level of epinephrine is also associated with lower concentration of immunoglobulins in our body. What does that tell you? What do you take away from this in regard to your prospective clients, your prospective clinic practice? Okay, regarding epigenetic, what Tracy and Isabel you are saying, we'll talk about that in next session. Okay. Yes, you're right. It is flexible. We can work on it. Okay. But we'll go into it in next session. Let's stay with direct impacts of stress for today's session. So Jane is saying that she would look at specific nutrients to support immune system because clients who are coming with exposure to chronic stress may have lower immune responses. That's correct. That's why, cortisol is given to suppress immunity in certain disease conditions. Okay. So yes, Tracy, in my practice, I address stress first, then go into the other impact, because whatever I try to do, if the cortisol is still there, it's not going to let pump up that immune response. Okay, and we'll learn about those nutrients. Um, another impact that we have noticed is that intestinal microbiome is impacted by stress. And what we have found out is that it not only inhibits microbiome numbers, but it also reduces the diversity of healthy bacteria. So again, the point I mentioned earlier, that I'll try to talk about a little bit of research and also draw your attention that the data is inconsistent. So that's what we mean when we are saying, give us critical appraisal, critical discussion. So that's what we are targeting as. So this was one study done among undergraduates during a week of exams. Obviously, students were stressed. And what they noticed were that their fecal sample showed that they had low number of good bacteria, which is lactobacillus. But then there was another study which is quite recent, and they found that when medical students were taking their exams, this was not the case. So the point is that we need to look at various parameters. Maybe these medical students have been exposed to these exam situations, or they were more aware how to cope with stress. That's why their bacterial colonies were not impacted. So we need to know more. That's the point. Then remaining on that microbial aspect, there is some animal data that showed that stress during intrauterine development affects microbiota. In a way, remember we talked about gut-brain axis, and they are saying when our gut layer is being made, when our immune system is being made, when the initial gut-brain axis neural connection are being made, microbiota has its influences. Okay. So that's how important good microbial colony is, because it can actually work at the level of when those HPA responses are being made initially in the human brain. Does chronic stress lead to obesity? And this is also kind of a really multi-layer impact, that more and more of chronic stress leads to central adiposity. And there are various ways it can have its impact. Some people who are stressed, they go after sweets. Some people, they lose their appetite. Isn't it? What else? Do you think sleep has anything to do with it? Apart from food, if people are losing sleep when they are stressed, does that play a role as well? Thanks, Tracy. Yes. So it's acting at various levels. Now, why and how chronic stress lead to obesity? It is a little complicated. We are talking about sleep deprivation. We are talking about that when we are not eating healthy, even our fat cells, they secrete cytokines, which are inflammatory molecules such as interleukins, tumor necrosis factor alpha. So these are certain names that we will learn more in session 10. Okay? And they are also produced by our immune cells. So when that inflammation happens, that can lead to obesity. Okay? So if we try to look at some of the research, I have quoted just 2 clinical studies which were actually done about 20 years ago. And in most of these studies, they are looking at salivary cortisol to measure the amount of stress, which I think is quite limiting because I would also like to see inflammatory modulators, as you are mentioning in the chat box. Isabel, you are right, interleukin 1 and 7, absolutely correct. So I would also like to look at sleep pattern, as Jane and Tracy are mentioning. So everything played together. But let's stay with what this study found. So they found that waist to hip ratio, fasting glucose, all these metabolic parameters, they had a significant correlation with salivary cortisol. Okay. So again, there are different factors. There may be some hedonic control happening when we are coping a stress. We want to have some pleasure. That's why we go for those comfort foods. So that might be an issue. But if we try to look at the research, we are still not sure. But from personal experiences, I know we all can make a association. Then there was another study done among 67 university women students, and they tried to understand cytokine response to acute mental stress. And they found that there was an association between central adiposity and higher cytokines were noticed to be present in their blood samples. Okay? And then there come the role of leptin and ghrelin. More layers in our understanding about how all these mechanisms are happening. Have we, sorry, have we heard about leptin and ghrelin? So it's kind of trying to understand when some people say that they fail to lose weight. Okay, and now they are saying that that is actually under the control of 2 different hormones called as ghrelin or leptin. And they are secreted by endothelial layer in our gut. So leptin has to tell the brain that I am full. Stop your hunger. Don't eat anymore. And what they are finding is that people who have chronic stress, who are centrally obese, they may also have leptin resistance. The way we have insulin resistance, similarly, they may have leptin resistance. So the point is that the cross-linking between all this factor may be the cytokines, the inflammatory modulators that are released under the impact of high stress level. But to understand it clinically, we need to look at the comprehensive randomized controlled trial, and there are not many. Okay. So this actually I've already discussed earlier because you people were very rightly commenting in the chat box. So just a little bit on this sentence, and that's what I found in my PhD. And that's again interesting that, and it is not my study, there is a lot of data coming out of another research group in Boston who are looking at telomere lengths, that high maternal BMI along with high infant birth rate, weight, which is above 4 kilos, may be associated with higher DNA damage. Again, it is new data. We need to do more correlation analysis to understand whether it has similar implication as we know low birth weight has. Because if a baby is born of a low birth weight, they are more at risk of being exposed to metabolic conditions later in their adulthood. So whether that's the case for this also, we need to know more. But the point that I take away from this is that body is again trying to keep a homeostasis. And that line is very, very thin. And you go either way, it can have health implications. Okay. So winding up this session, this part of this session about impact of chronic stress on health, that because of all these biochemical parameters, inflammation, cortisol, immune system, ghrelin, leptin, we now know that in chronic stress, there is dysregulation of HPA axis, and that is correlated with various conditions, including eating disorders. Okay. But we have to understand that it is not our body. There are other factors that are playing, that are major actors in this play. So sedentary lifestyle, the socio-economic scenario, they also play a major role. Let's take a 10 minutes break. What do you say? I think we all need a kind of a 10 minutes break. Yes, great. Thank you. Let's take a 10 minutes break. And the plan is that when we come back, we will have a small discussion. We'll go through these blogs and kind of discuss about intermittent fasting and whether it is good, whether it is bad, and how we can reflect on our understanding of chronic stress so far. Okay, great. Let's take a 10 minutes break. So the next one is that I hope you all have heard about intermittent fasting. So do you want to discuss about impact of intermittent fasting and whether it is good or whether it leads to a stressful situation, so a person should not follow it? Do you want to go into a breakout room and discuss on your own about what these articles are saying? Or maybe because we are a small group, we can read it just here and discuss it among ourselves? Whatever you say. Okay, one link is not working. Which one? Can you, second link? Okay. I'll have a look. Let's look at the first one then together and see what they are saying. Oh, it will open up for me in a different window. Just a sec. Okay, so tell me about intermittent fasting. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it okay? Would you advise that to your client? Why? Why not? So I know Jane wrote something in the chat box that, yes, I like that, that you would like to read the actual paper to understand the mechanism that cause insulin resistant. And yes, a part of us think that fasting can be stressful, isn't it? But it has few benefits, especially if it is done at a particular time. Time is very, very important because we have to follow the cortisol curve, the circadian rhythm. And as usual, I will like to digress here that when I was growing up, there is a particular people who follow a tradition or a culture in which their first meal is with the sunrise and they never eat after sunset. So, and it is about 500, 600-year-old tradition. Yes, Isabel, timing is very, very important. So Tracy is saying that, intermittent fasting may work only in short term. So again, just to summarize, and the point that you're making that we would like to read the articles. Great. So I found this one. So this is kind of a randomized controlled study, but it was done only on 47 people. Okay. And what they found was they asked them to do fasting and they reduced their calorie intake by about 300 kilocalorie per day. And they found that there was considerable weight reduction in the fasting group. And they also found that there was reduction in glycated hemoglobin, insulin levels, and HOMA index. So glycated hemoglobin is when the sugar molecule is attached to RBCs, and RBC's life is 120 days. So we measure glycated hemoglobin to know whether a person has a long-term glucose homeostasis. So it is the best indicator if you want to look at glucose metabolism for your clients. And HOMA is actually a combination of all these parameters. Together, they are put in a statistical software to see whether people have good glycemic control. Okay, so this one has few positive to say. and maybe something you wanted to look at in depth. And there is another one. Now, again, this is something extra that I am kind of diverting your attention to. So, what they are saying is that when we do intermittent fasting, we trigger what we know as autophagy or autophagy, okay, the way you choose to pronounce it. Has anybody heard about autophagy? Awesome. So, oh, I haven't seen whether you're saying yes. Okay, great. Yes, yes. Okay, good. Yes, so that's my understanding. I have heard and read about it that every, like humans, we have a mechanism to degrade, to eat away all the material which is not relevant to our body, and through certain signaling mechanism we can reuse it. So it is kind of quite complicated pathway, but it is good for the body. Okay? It protects us from the diseases because all the dead cells who are not useful to us, they are eaten up by the lysosomes, and their protein and whatever fat that particular cell had, it is used for body's processes. Okay. Yes. And we will touch about that when we do our session in 12. Okay, in that I will talk about some of these signaling pathways. So that's one of the major benefits of intermittent fasting. That is, and you can see that it is quite recent article, and there is data coming up that why they are helpful. So do you all kind of are in consensus that we can use this strategy for our clients based on their overall health status, whether they agree to participate, and maybe they may be simply interested. So do you think it is evidence? We have some evidence now? Okay, good. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, all of you, for keeping this session alive. Thank you. Okay, so now you were talking about earlier in the session that you would like to tackle. Okay, first Isabel is asking, you want to have the link to that study. Is it okay? I have not saved it on my desktop, but I'll post it on the loop. Is that okay? Link to study of lysosomes you want to ask now? Okay. So great, I'll do that on the loop. Now Tracy is asking a good question that everyone responds differently though. I can't go without food for more than 3 hours unless I'm sleeping. Yes, Tracy, definitely. That's why I mentioned looking at the holistic picture of our client. Maybe their metabolism is already high. You might not have to go towards intermittent fasting. But then I wonder, all the ancient wisdom tradition have some sort of fasting. Even in France, they have a festival, and I used to take that other subject, sociology of nutrition, and I noticed there they have fast. Apart from, Islam has some Ramadan, but then when I was growing up, we have fast every week. There is some sort of festival, and they will say you need to fast. But then there is another dimension. In my part of the world, they will always expect only the females to fast. So that's kind of another discussion. Um, Right. Then Dale is also saying a point. Yes, but I would not recommend it for people with eating disorders, as when they Refed again, they tend to overeat. It is also best to follow a mucusless diet during fasting, both before and after for best result. Yes, again, that's what we are learning. We need to make individualized dietary or naturopathic intervention. So look at a person's medical history, family history very carefully before implementing any such strategy. Very good. I want you all to look at these things critically. So I'm happy. I'm happy you people are raising these issues. Okay. Great. Great. Thanks, Dale, for sharing all those studies. Good. It is very interesting topic. I agree. And yeah. So, okay. So earlier we were talking about whether we know of certain nutrients or herbs that can modulate HPA excess. Uh, So we try to look at some anecdotal evidence. We also try to look at some of the research, and most of the investigations have looked at the cortisol response. So I'm not happy that they have not looked at the overall picture. If it was under my control, all the nutrition studies would look at hormones, blood parameters, metabolites, neurotransmitters, inflammatory modulators, everything. But unfortunately, the data has looked at only cortisol in most of the cases. So the first nutrient that I would like you all to remember from exam perspective and from your future clinic is vitamin B complex. There is various data that if B vitamins such as folate, B6 and B12 is given in optimum dosage, then it can address stress. Now, this was an Australian RCT in which they give the famous Executive B formula from a popular brand that was administered to people for 3 months. And they found that it improved their mood and psychological strain that was associated with chronic work stress. The sample size was really low, but we have some information. Now you must be thinking how and why. How does vitamin B help? So now this is again, this will become clear next week where B6 and B12 come. But from exam mechanism, when I ask for rationale, we are looking at homocysteine. It is an intermediary compound that is made in the one carbon metabolism when we are actually supposed to be making methionine. So for some reason, we can't make methionine and homocysteine remains in the body, and that homocysteine causes inflammation. So that is just one point that we know, or one step where vitamin B can actually reduce inflammation and thereby help with stress. Then another important nutrient that we all can remember is omega-3. Okay. So there is data that diet high in omega-3 can improve a person's response to a stressor. So the first study which I found was actually done among rats. However, there was another study which was done among humans. This is called as a famous Netherlands study of depression and anxiety conducted among more than 2,500 people. And then what they found was when they looked at omega-3 dietary intake among these people, they had significant negative association with inflammatory markers, cortisol, and even heart rate. More data on omega-3. This one was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in which they looked at omega-3 as well as they also administered a different fatty acid, that is phosphatidylserine. Then they found that perceived chronic stress was impacted by this supplementation. It reduced cortisol in highly stressed individual. Now you must be wondering how omega-3 help. This will become clearer in session 10 because omega-3 becomes part of the cell membrane, and from there it is utilized by our body to make inflammatory mediators, cytokines that I have been talking so long. So in session 10, we will study about how omega-3 is anti-inflammatory, and by being so, it can even reduce cortisol. So please remember this rationale. Would you agree that magnesium is another important nutrient that can address HPA dysregulation? It is one of my favorite nutrient, as I'm assuming for you people also. There is again convincing data, consistent data that magnesium supplement can reduce serum cortisol concentration among elderly people with insomnia. It can reduce inflammatory responses as well. So it works actually at various levels. It even works in the brain by reducing the inflammation in the brain. We all know it works at the skeletal muscle as well, where we are producing ATPs. But it is a cofactor for all the neurotransmitter synthesis as well. So magnesium works at various levels. No surprise in this slide when we talk about vitamin C, because it worked as an antioxidant, so it reduces inflammation. However, remember when we were studying vitamin C that it is stored or it is located maximally in the adrenal glands. So if we have sufficient intake of vitamin C, it can attenuate cortisol levels. So remember vitamin C for addressing stress. Would anybody comment about some of the herbs also? Some of our amazing herbs that can address HPA axis dysregulation? Sorry. Again, yes, Jane, I agree. I have heard of Withania or Wathania, and Tracy's asking Saint John Wort. Okay, I'm also not sure. Yes, ashwagandha. Yes, I've heard about that. Yeah. So yes, there are some amazing herbs that can be used to address stress. And then our favorite probiotics. We have discussed about how gut-brain axes are linked up. There is, a lot of rat study in which they have grown mice without any bacteria in the sterile environment. And they found that they were not able to have any contradictory mechanism to combat stress. So they will breed these rats and then expose them to stress. So that's how they collected all that data that probiotics can actually modulate gut microbiota and thereby reduce cytokine. And the species to look at is Lactobacilli and Bifidobacterium. So they are the good one. One of another herb which Isabel is sharing in the chat is ginseng. Yes, good one. Then there was this another one in which a study in which probiotic Lactobacillus casei was administered to about 149 medical students, and they looked at their salivary cortisol. And what they found was that the physical symptoms of stress were reduced among these people. So very good to go after some of the fermented foods because they will be looking at promoting the microbiome in our gut. But again, when we look at critically, we look that this research was actually supported by one of the brands. So whenever we are reviewing such data, need to point out such claims. Okay. But apart from these nutrients and these amazing herbs, do you think certain mind-body practices can also address stress? What do you say? And are you aware of any such activities? Have you seen and benefits of such practices? Yes, mindfulness, meditation, agreed. They all help in some way. Breathing exercises, simply reminding people to have deep breathing help. Couple of years ago, we were associating with a psychology clinic in Adelaide. So our nutrition students will go, they will do a small presentation, prepare some food, and we will invite people in the morning from nearby offices to talk about, importance of food and a good breakfast. And there we had a researcher who was looking at breathing and how it impacts the gut function and stress. So her PhD was on breathing. And I wondered where in our process of evolution, humans simply forgot that there has to be a rhythmic, continuous breathing. So, okay, Tracy is asking, I'm sure there are some studies to support these practices too. I'm glad you commented on that because I did look at some of the recent data to authenticate these claims. And there have been some clinical setting where people have been exposed to such activities such as yoga and Tai Chi, simply breathing as well, listening to Tibetan ball music, and the studies have looked at the release of GABA, release of serotonin, and other neurotransmitters, and then they have gone and looked at the blood levels of various metabolites. So you can see that in 2017, we even had a systematic review and meta-analysis of 42 studies that showed us that practices of yoga is associated with influencing sympathetic nervous system and HPA axis stress responses. And this diagram is taken from that review article by Measham et al., published in 2017. And what they found was that different kind of these mind-body practices, it influences directly certain brain areas, that is hypothalamus and pituitary glands. And we know all the hormones, they are originating from here. So they influence vagus nerve, they influence even systematic nervous system tone. Now, though we need more data, the recent clinical research is saying that it can modulate gene expression also, thereby strengthening immune responses. Okay. So at various level, different kind of mind-body practices can work wonder. But I should point it out that some of this data needs certain validation. It needs to be done in a diverse population, diverse ages, diverse health conditions as well. Again, there was, a couple of years ago, I was noticing, I was actually sitting in front of television, and there was this program which was talking about a lady who was in Sydney and she had undergone cancer surgery and chemotherapy. And her naturopath actually helped in devising her garden. And that garden had exposure to different sensory stimulations. Uh, and that was part of her holistic care. That she would, and her gardener had made a meditation hut in her garden along with those amazing flowers. And yeah, I'm just having goosebumps remembering about that. Sorry. So the point that I'm making is that we can work in a holistic manner, and these factors play certain roles. Yes, we need certain studies, but here goes our anecdotal evidence, our ancient wisdom that can be used to support each and every human being to go through any kind of stress in their life. So remember to take deep breathing. That really helps. Yeah, that's all for today. Any questions, any comments, anything you like to share, any activity that you engage in and you have noticed that it has helped you? That's an important point. Isabel is saying that it is also important to ascertain whether the person wants to overcome their issues. Yes, I agree. And I'm sure in your social science subjects, you must be discussing and learning about those contemplation and pre-contemplation phases that a person goes through. I completely agree. They have to be in that um, mental status of accepting that we are going through a different phase, and that acceptance can lead to reaching out to resolve and go through that situation. Yes, Courtney, I always do that deep belly breathing exercise when I'm delivering lectures to you. So, yes, completely agree, Isabel. Sometimes people are not willing to work on it, and there is a phase. Sometimes we don't accept that it is quite challenging because maybe we are comparing with other people's situation. Um, so, Tracy, thanks for sharing that. She's sharing about how one of her friend was in a rehab clinic and they used to do Tai Chi every morning. So definitely that helps. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. That was an amazing interaction today. I really appreciate you all participating, sharing, and asking all these questions. It was a wonderful session, and hope you have a very good week and see you next week. Bye for now.